This happened to me a few years back. I live in a suburban neighborhood that borders a large park, which part of is public and the rest of is closed off reservoir. The public section of the park is sprawling over several acres. There are hiking trails in the woods, a baseball field, basketball and tennis courts, and a playground area. The park is accessible by car via a winding one-lane road that goes through the playground area and around to more remote sections in the woods. Eventually, this road leads out to a major, busy highway. At one point, it was used as a cut-through to get from the highway to my neighborhood and beyond. Nowadays, there are several much larger access points to the neighborhood, and the cut-through is seldom used. My story begins on a late winter afternoon. I was spending the day home with my now ex-husband, who was an avid runner. He decided to go out into the foot trail and take a run down the one-lane road. He did this often, and the crime rate in this area is extremely low, so I thought nothing of it. After about an hour or so, he comes back all sweaty. I asked him how the run went and his time per mile, etc. He tells me he was slower than usual that day and just wasn't feeling very well during the run. As he's heading to the shower to rinse off, he casually says, "Oh, I heard this dog whimpering in the woods when I was running." I'm a bleeding heart for the wounded animals and asked him for more specifics. He said that he had not gone looking for the whimpering dog because the noise had stopped shortly after it started. He then said the last thing we need is another pet and went off to shower. I sat there for a bit, looking at my 3 dogs laying on the floor and lazily pawing at each other. After a few moments, I couldn't stand it anymore, so I laced up my tennis shoes, grabbed my treats, and headed to my car. My husband was just getting out of the shower by the time I told him I was going to look for the dog. He said that I was crazy but didn't try to stop me, nor did he want to go out with me. By now, daylight was fast fading and it was close to 5:30 p.m. The spot he'd heard the whimpering was about 2 minutes from our house. I drove over and pulled my car to the shoulder, so as not to block the lane. I got out and started calling for the dog, "Here, doggy," and other similar phrases to see if it would start whimpering again and come out to greet me. I heard nothing, so after about a minute or so, I decided to venture out into the woods. The woods in this area of the park are not too dense, with trees that are spaced at least 8 to 10 feet apart, on average, and the forest floor was blanketed with fallen leaves. Every step I made was a loud crunch. I'd stop, call out for a little bit, be still, and then slowly move forward into the woods. I thought I could hear a dog whimper once or twice, but it was always happened when I was calling out, so I couldn't be sure. The less I walked, the less light there was, and the more dense the woods became. I had brought my cell phone, but this didn't have a flashlight up at the time. I've been out there walking, calling, and stopping for about 20 minutes, when I came upon a small clearing. I've always been fascinated by the occult, but all the stories I've read did not prepare me for what I saw in that clearing. The first thing that caught my eye was this formation of sticks, laid on the ground. The sticks were all the same size and formed a small circle. Inside the circle, there were 3 more sticks popped up on a tripod formation in the center. On the top of the tripod was a small doll's head, with the eyes missing from their sockets. I immediately had this "oh fuck" moment, where I realized that I was a woman alone in the woods at dusk, with no form of protection on me, and in a spot where I was clearly not meant to be. I froze in the place as I surveyed my surroundings. To make myself less scared, I called out again softly this time, "Come here, puppy." There were small bones in the pile at the far edge of the clearing. A bush to my left and several more gouged eye dolls' heads hanging from the branches. It was not windy that day, but I swear I heard the rustling of leaves the last time I called for the dog. As I scanned the perimeter from left to right, my eyes suddenly fixed for a split second across the clearing on something in the trees. There, about 8 to 10 feet back in the bushes, was a man's face. I kept my eyes moving, because something told me not to let him know I'd seen him by staring or reacting in any way. The brief moment I glanced at him was enough to momentarily paralyze me. His hair was long and unkempt. His eyes were almost bulging as he stared at me. I couldn't see the rest of him because of the tree cover. At this point, my flight response finally kicked in and I was able to move again. I remember saying something to the effect of, "Silly dog must have found his way home," as I started to back out of the clearing, still scanning. He didn't appear to be pursuing me, so as soon as I was half hidden by the trees to my side, I took off running at full speed to my car. I couldn't tell how long it was or how far it was, but daylight was all gone now. I somehow made it back to the road, a few yards behind where my car was parked. I sprinted to it and locked myself inside. It took me 4 attempts to get my key in the ignition with how badly my hands were trembling. I finally got the car started and beat the hell out of there. I took the long way home to my house by going onto the main highway and entering my neighborhood through another well-traveled intersection. As soon as I was home, I called the police and reported what I had seen. They never followed up with me. The more I thought about it over the years, I'm convinced that this man in the woods was the one whimpering, to lure a gullible victim like me off the little road into the woods.
When I just turned 18, I figured it'd be best to move out on my own. It isn't like I had family problems or anything like that, I just really wanted to start my life as an adult. I'd often daydream about throwing crazy parties, being able to hook up without having to find a spot, and always having beer in the fridge, and basically just have a ridiculous amount of freedom. So, the summer after high school, I found this small apartment complex on the south side of town. It wasn't anything fancy. 5 apartments to a floor, 3 floors per building, and 7 buildings spaced out along a horseshoe-spaced road, with some woodland surrounding it. My apartment wasn't very big. Now, being fresh out of high school and working a super low-end job as a waiter, I could only afford a small studio apartment. I was fortunate enough to snag one on the 3rd floor so I didn't have to go up any stairs. I planned on going to college, but as some people know, it doesn't always work out that way. After fall and semester started, I still hadn't enrolled. I started doing double shifts at my work to keep myself busy. Living alone in a studio apartment can really take a mental toll on somebody. Seriously, it can. Sitting around all day doing absolutely nothing, waiting to go to work and only really growing older. Not to mention, most of my friends ran off to schools out of state and I was the only one left behind. I'm not throwing any parties by myself or for myself. I'm just saying. Anyway, I'd work these doubles all day. They were roughly 10-hour shifts depending on how busy the restaurant was. I'd come back super late at night, way past when the sun went down, walk through the giant horseshoe back to my apartment that sat all the way on the other end. Now, at some point in all of this, I realised that college was out of the question for me, so I started saving money for a new car. I kept most of my tip money in a large box under my bed, and when I'd come home, I'd pull it out, throw the money in, and then go and sleep. Well, that was my intention. The problem is, since I'd be working so much and just being a kid, I always wanted to go and get in some personal time by watching television, playing video games, or throwing on one of my favourite movies. I'd usually be able to stay up all night by doing it. In fact, I'd crush about 4 hours of sleep, then wake up, rinse, repeat. After so long, I couldn't really do this anymore, mainly because I had to cancel my cable in order to pay rent, as well as pawn off some of my gaming systems and DVD players. It really sucked for me. Movies and television were my life. I wanted to go to school to study them, but being an adult, it always costs a lot. Still, even after I had nothing to do, I still couldn't sleep. Like some people. I'd stay up all night, smoke a ridiculous amount of cigarettes and just stare out of my window in the middle of the night. Also, where I'm from, we'd get these crazy electrical storms passing from time to time, especially in the late summer or early fall. I just watched those all the time, having nothing to do really, open my eyes to my surroundings. In the end, I actually got to know all the people who like to smoke late at night. I knew how many people like to drive over to Taco Bell past midnight in order to get a snack. I also knew that the entire apartment complex would become a ghost town at around 2 in the morning. There'd be absolutely nothing going on. It'd just be me, either staring out of my window or smoking on my balcony. So one night, I decided to take a walk. I did laps around the horseshoe and listened to an old iPod shuffle. It was also very cold that night, so I wore an old hoodie that I had with the hood up. To be honest, I probably looked extremely suspicious, but honestly, I was just out for a walk. I followed this massive iron fence that wrapped around the entire apartment complex. I was heading back home when I came across something really weird. There was a gate, but it led off into the woods that surrounded the apartment complex. I found it rather weird. I mean, the place was gated, but There was no other place that had a gate on this side of the complex, not to mention that it obviously led to absolutely nowhere. It gave me chills to see that it was open. I just stared off into the harrowing darkness of the surrounding woodland. I hoped to see if anybody was out there, or maybe find somebody to talk to, just so I could forget about it. I didn't know what to do. I just kept moving. Luckily, I could see the gate from my apartment and decided to play a new game. Who opened the gate? After coming home from work, I placed my tips in the box, went to my window and stared out and looked for the gate. I could see it from my apartment, luckily. It was just really hard to see. There wasn't any street lights around that damned thing, and honestly, it looked like there wasn't even anybody there. This time the gate was shut, and when it shut, it blended into the fence perfectly. Nobody could see it unless they were opening the thing, which I did. I didn't bother to tell anybody because I didn't think it was a big deal. To be honest, I thought somebody was going out there to smoke a bowl or do some weird stuff in the woods. Honestly, I didn't know. I didn't really care what was going on behind there, but I did need something to pass my hours. So I'm just sitting there on the balcony waiting for things to happen. It's now way past 2 AM. I'm the only thing awake in this complex as far as I'm concerned, and I'm just smoking away a pack on my times. I then start getting tired and figured out that I'd call it a night, when I suddenly heard a squeaking or creaking sound coming from the iron gate. The metal sounded really rusted. It was way louder from what I remembered a long time ago. I lowered myself down, trying to hide myself amongst the shadows of my balcony. I didn't want to spook whoever it was going into the trees. I squinted my eyes trying to get a good picture. I could then see a shadow moving among the darkness of the tree line, but I soon realised that whoever it was wasn't coming from the apartment complex. They were going in. My first thought was that maybe it was a person who worked on the other side of the forest and used that as a shortcut through. I never saw it happen before, but maybe they discovered a new route or something. Maybe it was one of my neighbours. I thought that until my eyes had adjusted properly to the darkness, however. Whoever came from those trees wasn't a person that lived in my complex. They were physically handicapped. I think they were hunched in their back a bit. Their arms swayed back and forth, almost like they were dragging them lifelessly. The knees of this person were also really close to the ground, more than I could possibly imagine somebody still being able to walk with. The movement of the body was just haunting. I guess that's the right word. The sight of it alone could stop my heart. I couldn't tell the gender of the person, but they did have medium hair that covered a proportion of their face. The person then moved away from the gate, falling around in a very disturbing manner. They mumbled something to themselves. It was still loud enough that I could hear it. I couldn't understand what they were saying, but to be honest, it sounded like gibberish. I figured out whoever this was extremely disturbed. I held my breath as I watched the person move from behind the building across from mine towards the one right next to it. They actually stayed away from the streetlights that lined the horseshoe-shaped drive. They were trying to move through the shadows, avoiding detection as much as possible. I didn't even move an inch. I just watched as they started to make their way to a building. As it made its way towards the front of the building, it quickly looked over its shoulder. In doing so, looking right at me. Now I don't know if they saw me. I don't know if they did, but they were pretty far away and it was dark, but I swear to God their eyes widened and they scurried off into the darkness. They didn't stand there. They didn't change anything about their posture. In that weird low walk they entered with and brushed off faster. It was faster than most people could run. I blinked a few times because I didn't believe it at first, but when I heard that gate slam shut, I knew it actually happened. I didn't sleep at all that night. It felt like it was a terrible thing that had happened to me. I had to call in for the morning part of my shift because I was unable to sleep and let them know that I wasn't going to be going in. After the sun came up, I finally went to work. I ended up having to stay late because one of my tables stuck around after we closed and just wanted a few more drinks with the manager. They were friends or something. I did get a $50 tip, so I really wasn't complaining. When I got home, I went to stash my money in my box. I opened it up and all of my cash remained, but a note read in some of the worst handwriting I've ever seen. "I saw you watching me." My heart stopped. How the hell did they know my room number? How did they get in? I started freaking out and wondered if they were still around. Being a studio apartment, they didn't have a lot of places to hide in, so I quickly checked in my bed, under my bed, in my closet, in my bathroom. They were long gone. I took a peek out my window and saw the gate closed. However, the damn brush of woodland swayed back and forth as if somebody was moving in it. I freaked out and called the police. It took them a bit to get there, and when they did, it seemed like the whole apartment came alive. All the lights came on and everybody's come out to see what the disturbance was. When I told the officers what was going on, they made me feel like I was an idiot. They didn't believe me one bit. I had to then tell them where the gate was, but I didn't go down there because I didn't want to show myself. When they went to look, sure enough, the gate was there. Two then went into the forest to look for this thing, and two of them stayed back with me and got my statements. Eventually, the two officers did come back. When they did, they were pale as ghosts. When one of the officers that stayed back with me to take my statement pressured them, they finally opened up. They said they didn't find anybody, but they did find a bunch of personal items hung up in various trees around the forest. They thought it was really weird and they began asking all my neighbours if they were missing anything. Then surely enough, people lined up to go and find that personal items of theirs were missing. Nothing of value. There were pictures inside frames, a hairbrush, books, things like that. Really odd things for somebody to steal. The people at the complex were creeped the hell out. I mean, I saw at least 5 moving trucks the next week. People just wanted to get out of there and I don't blame them. The owners of the complex came and sealed the gate using a blowtorch. Turns out, they had no idea that it was even there in the first place. They didn't put it in. I got out of Dodge when I had the chance. I didn't do my nightly routines anymore, but sure as hell I still couldn't sleep. I left all my lights on and paid my electricity bill and made sure of it. I still couldn't afford to live in that place for much longer anyway. I moved back to the north side of town in a smaller, cheaper apartment complex that wasn't surrounded by woodland. I still have nightmares about all of the things that happened to this day. I grew up in rural Michigan and rode the bus to school every morning. We lived in a house at the bottom of a hill on a country road. My bus stop, however, was at the top of the hill after you passed my house. The story I'm about to tell all happened to me when I was about 7 or 8 years old. I woke up one morning and got ready for school like I usually did. My bus picked me up at around 7 AM. This was right when the sun was starting to come up, but there were still spots of darkness in the deep wilderness. I was the only kid who was picked up at my bus stop, so I would stand at the edge of the woods and wait until the bus came. Now my mum or dad would have to drop me off about 5 minutes before the bus came and hightail it for work in order to make it there by 8. It's not that they completely felt comfortable by doing this, but they really didn't have many options. And we also lived in a safe area, or so we thought. And the bus arrived on time 99% of the time anyway, so they weren't too worried about anything that would happen to me in the 5 minutes I was left alone. So I'm standing there, cold as hell, waiting on the bus to come, watching the sunrise slowly going over the skies. It's still a little dark out, but yet bright enough to me to see what's going on around me. I saw the lights of the bus in the distance, on time as usual, and it came to a stop right in front of me. Now my bus driver, Miss Tricia, opened the door and said, "Good morning," and gestured for me to hop on. I walked to my seat and put my stuff down, but noticed that the bus wasn't moving yet. She had the door ajar, and she just sat there. leaning slightly out of her seat, staring into the woods. After a good minute or so of this, she finally closed the door and we were off. After arriving at school, she escorted us in, which is something that she never did, and I remember seeing her slip into the office and talking to one of the secretaries. I went through my regular school day and was picked up by my dad in the car. That was like normal, but as he picked me up though, he started asking me all kinds of questions. Bus pickup okay this morning? Any cars stop and blow the horn at you as you waited? Strange questions that he'd never asked me before. The next morning, my parents didn't take me to the bus stop. My mum dropped me off at school before going into work at a later time. This continued, alternating a drop off by my mum or dad, and that happened for the remainder of the school year. At the time, I noticed they also changed my bus stop. It was only years later that I found out what actually happened. As my teacher picked me up that morning, she saw a man standing in the woods behind where I was, just staring at me. She then told the school secretaries, who then told the transport ministers, who then told the police. The police investigated and found some items wrapped up in a t-shirt back in the woods. There was a hunting knife, a rope, a rag or washcloth, and some tape. The police never found out who that guy was or who them things belonged to, but my bus driver, my parents, and the police felt certain that whoever it was, they had the worst possible intentions for me. I think about this often and wonder what would have happened to me had my bus driver been a few minutes late, or had she not noticed that guy standing in the woods after the bus I was waiting for. Because of this incident, the school district changed my bus stop to be located right in front of my house. That way, I could stay in my house until the bus pulled up. No more standing by the woods for me. I resumed riding the bus next year. I just want to say a massive thank you to my bus driver for saving my life.
I don't really know how to start this, so I'll just jump straight into it. I will try to keep it as short as possible, but also want to make sure that I'm saying everything clear. I'll answer any questions in the comments if anything is left unclear. I'm a photographer, and there is a nature preserve maybe 2 or 3 miles from my house. I don't live in the best of areas, so it is one of the few places I could go within walking distance to get a decent shot when I need to post some for my social media BS. Being maybe 19 at the time, I was fortunate enough to have my mother drop me off on the occasion. The plan was for her to show up a little over an hour later to pick me up, to save me the multiple-mile trek back to our little home. Unfortunately, this isn't how things panned out. Just as we pulled up, another car did as well, and just a few seconds later, my mother was a little suspicious because it wasn't a very popular destination. But my mother always worries, so I ensured her that I would be fine and allowed her to head back to do things she needed to do at home. There are 3 different ways you can go in initially. A path that leads left, a path that leads right, and one up and through the middle. They all kind of loop back around at the same spot, but is a solid mile before it does so. I opted to take the middle trail as it is the most scenic, but paused near the entrance as I was still adjusting my equipment and taking some test shots before moving deeper, where I might potentially see wildlife or something worthwhile. This is when the man who pulled up after I did came in and proceeded to walk up the center trail as well. I continued fidgeting with my equipment even after having it properly adjusted as I waited for him to pass me. And as he did, he attempted to talk to me. Something along the lines of getting good photos, which any photographer will get when they are out shooting. I responded with something simple and kind, but also in a dismissive tone because I had no interest in continuing to converse with him. Something about him made me incredibly uncomfortable. So uncomfortable, in fact, that I decided to stay in the initial entrance area to photograph some boring-ass plants, even after he disappeared around the bend, and out of my line of sight. I'm so thankful I did that, because within 5 minutes he somehow managed to complete the full loop and end up behind me. The loop makes at least a solid 15 minutes to get through, and I'm in a hurry. The loop takes me at least a solid 15 minutes to get through, even when I'm in a hurry. He either busted ass to circle back around me or took a shortcut to do so. Noticing I was still by the entrance, he passed me again, walking the exact same way he had just been. This is when I noticed there was absolutely something going on. I stood there and watched as he walked the same exact path, even down and around to the bend out of my sight. I continued watching in the distance at the bend where I lost sight of him for a few seconds, and what do I see? Him peeking around the corner to see me. Once he noticed I saw him, he disappeared again. This is when I simply said, "Fuck this shit," and left. As soon as I exited the preserve, I took off in a full sprint, hoping I would put some distance between the two of us. Just as I was about to turn down a side street, I turned back to see him exiting the preserve and entering his vehicle. My phone was dead, I never charged the damn thing, and I had absolutely no way to contact anyone. I was at the point to where I contemplated running up to someone's house and asking them for help or to call someone for me. But I was worried that I might seem like a crazy person. I turned the corner and once again, we no longer had sight of each other. I was out of breath and unable to keep running. I just began to pray that he was no longer going to follow me. Maybe this was all of it. Just some weird coincidence, right? Apparently, prayer doesn't work because within a few moments, he was back in sight, turning the corner and beginning to approach on the same street that I was now on. My mind was racing, with all of the possibilities of what he was going to do to me. But without much time, I decided that I wasn't going to give him the opportunity to do anything. I continued walking until he literally pulled up within feet of me, with his window down. I threw my bag down onto the ground next to me, turned in his direction, and balled fist and shouted with the full power of my lungs, "I will kill you if you don't get the fuck away from me." The angry little scowl he had on his face the entire time faded and began to resemble more of a deer in the headlights. He didn't know what to do, and then he nervously uttered, "I have rights," before speeding off to never be seen again. I then had to complete the walk home, constantly looking over my shoulder and hoping that he didn't make another approach. I'm just glad to have made the decisions that I made that day, because I genuinely have no idea what would have happened that day if I didn't. I do not know if this story will come across as horrifying, as it was in person, but if it doesn't, it's simply a failure of my writing ability.
So here's a bit of background first. I live in a neighbourhood with lots of abandoned houses. There's about 12 houses in my neighbourhood and over 7 of them sit abandoned. In one of the abandoned houses there's a playground in the backyard that the old neighbours left behind. Now I was 12 at the time and I knew in my brain I was a little bit too old to be playing on the playground made for 6-year-olds, but I just can't resist a nice swing set. I would spend some extra time over there, as it was usually summer and I would usually play video games. The house is past some woods you have to walk through about a block away from my own. It was a normal day and my mother said I should go to get some fresh air outside and that she was tired of watching me play video games. I thought it was a perfect opportunity to go to the swing set. Now it was absolutely beautiful outside this day. Not too hot, but still warm with a slight wind. So I put my shoes on and began the trek towards the forest. As I was about maybe 5 steps in, I heard a branch snap. Now I hear these all the time from squirrels, so I really don't think anything of it. I finally finished walking through the forest and reach a house. I open the back fence, look in, and start to swing. I swing for about maybe 2 minutes when I hear breathing. Now I stop for a moment, trying to think where the hell this is coming from. After about 30 seconds of stopping, I force myself to think it was just me. I then continue for another 5 minutes and decide that I was done for now. As soon as I sit up, I hear, "Hey." I look around for a moment and then notice that there's a man, about mid-30s or early 40s. He has dirty gross black hair that's all over the place, a stained up sweatshirt, underwear with the back cut out so you can see everything. This guy was obviously homeless, but he had this crazy look in his eyes. Here I am, 5'2", 95 pounds with no strength, staring at a 6'2", 170 pound man. I wasn't really sure what to do at this moment. I mustered up all of the courage I could and said, "Hey, what's up?" The guy then stared at me and a massive smile came across his face. After 15 seconds, which seemed more like 40 minutes, he said, "Have room for one more?" I quickly said, "I'm actually leaving, it's all yours." The man opened up the gate and walked past me and sat down. He then began to swing. I then speed walked towards that gate and shut it and started walking into the forest as quickly as I could. About 20 seconds later, I hear a loud, "Get back here now," and heard the gate spinning open and running not far behind me. I practically have a heart attack and start running as fast as I possibly can. I somehow made it back to my house and locked the door without the man noticing where I went. I told my mum, who practically in tears called the police. The police searched around and came back a couple of hours later with no one. Of course. How was that going to settle my mind? So that night, I was tossing and turning in my bed when I heard footsteps in the street. I look out my window to see a man looking through the windows of all the houses on my street. I start to shake as I grabbed the phone and called the police without even telling my parents. The cops showed up a few minutes later and caught the man. The cops couldn't give us a whole lot of information though, but a few days later, the cops called us and told us that this guy has a mental illness and he's been living in one of the abandoned houses for a couple of weeks now, and that he planned on kidnapping me and doing God knows what. A few years ago when I still lived in upstate New York, something really freaky happened to me. If you've ever been to upstate New York during the winters, you know that it can snow a lot. I usually just spent snowy nights watching TV. I lived about a mile or so from any other house and my roommate was out. Now, I'll be honest, being alone made me feel uncomfortable. I always had an overactive imagination, and any small sound that I heard would really freak me out. Like I was saying, my roommate was out and it was snowing heavily. It was probably like 9 or 10 at night and I was watching TV like normal. All of a sudden, I heard a crunching sound outside on the snowy ice that was next to the forest. It was like somebody was stepping on ice. I immediately tensed up and my mind began to race over every possibility. Now I knew for a fact that it wasn't my roommate. He didn't have a car. I listened in horror as I could hear the crunches getting louder. I then ran into my room and locked the door. I got out my shotgun and grabbed my cell phone ready to dial 911 just in case. I know it might seem like I was overreacting, but remember, this is night, in a heavy snowstorm, miles and miles away from any other houses. Who could possibly be outside? The footsteps just stopped at some point though. I eventually fell asleep. When I woke up, my roommate was back. I then went outside to see if I could find any evidence of who was outside, and what I found still haunts me. I saw footprints in the snow coming out of the woods and circling around my house. The footprints were filled in for the most part, so it was hard to figure out where they were going. But the scariest part in all of this is the following. The footprints stopped directly outside my bedroom window. All of the other footprints were filled in, but these were fresh. It was as if somebody had been standing there all night, since the snow had stopped early in the morning. To this day, it scares me most not knowing just who or what is out there in those woods. The fact that while I was in my room, they were literally standing straight outside my window and I was expecting them to come through the door. I moved out of that house a few months later. So my family owns a cabin on a lake up in New Hampshire. We go there every summer. It's basically our home away from home. There are other houses on the lake, quite a few near us, but beyond that, it's a pretty rural area. There's literally miles and miles of wooded area. There's really no reason to be in these areas unless you're hunting, own a lake house, or visiting the lake for whatever reason. So one night, maybe 6 years ago, it was late, probably around midnight. My ex and I were just laying in bed chatting about whatever. All of a sudden, we hear footsteps outside the open window. Now the window only lays about halfway up the wall on the side of the bed, and it's situated so that it opens right to the bottom of the bed where our feet are. The ground around my house is covered in a layer of pine needles that all drop from above. So to be honest, it'd be pretty hard for somebody to walk quietly. But the footsteps sounded like whatever it was making them were trying their absolute best not to be heard. They sounded relatively close, but we rationalised to ourselves that they were probably made by some kind of animal. All goes quiet for a short while now. We begin to think maybe it's over. But then, a few minutes later, we hear them, but this time they seem much closer. They seem to be right outside our window now, still trying to move quietly. At this point, the two of us are starting to get freaked out. To our own mutual horror, we look down and see a hand slowly coming through the window. We obviously scream and wake up the house. My parents come running out of their adjacent bedroom. The hand then quickly disappears, and I tell my dad exactly what has happened. He then rationalises that it was both of our imaginations playing tricks on us. To this day, I don't know if he's right. The weird thing is that both my ex and I saw the exact same thing. How could both our imaginations materialise this at the exact same time? To this day, I feel uneasy staying in that room, and I always make sure to shut the window before I go to bed.
I'm a 17-year-old male living in the Midwest. My sophomore year of high school, my friends peer pressured me into joining the track team. I thought that this was a good idea because I wanted to improve my stamina. So due to this fact, I was asked to join the long-distance track team. To practice, our small team would run in the woods, and then to a lake. These woods are mostly used for off-road biking, so we would run in the forest in the diet paths that the bikes would make. After school, we would run in these woods every day. Time to time, we saw a deer. These deer would get very close, so much though that one would only need to take 3 or 4 steps to pet one. These woods were fun to run in because they could become so secluded, and I could really enjoy the nature. The last day I ran in these woods, it was just another day. Due to my poor stamina, I was pretty far back in the rest of the group, and I had produced a fairly painful side cramp. In fact, I stopped to take a breather. Let me give you a layout of the path I was on. The bike path is cut into a slope, dividing it into 2 parts. The upper half is surrounded in trees, and above is just more woods. The other half is the slope that leads to ponds and more woods. As I was admiring nature, I heard a loud snap high up in the woods. In so many scary stories, people say they get that feeling where they feel dread or that the hair on the back of their neck stands up. This feeling is very real, as I too got this feeling. Turning around, I expected to see a deer, yet to my utter horror, I saw a man. He was pretty far away, but I saw his jeans and long-sleeve checkered shirt. A bit of background on myself. I am currently a 3rd degree black belt in Taekwondo, going on 15 years of practicing martial arts. Still with my knowledge of self-defense, I was put off and began a light jog. To my utter horror, the man began to sprint down the slope at an angle. The creepiest part of this sudden sprint was how he used the trees to propel himself. I suddenly realized why he was running at an angle. He wanted to cut me off. Realizing I could not outrun him, I said a prayer and ripped off an old stick of a fallen tree. The man finally made it down the hill. I was faced with what I believe was a homeless man. The smell was very pungent. His eyes were bloodshot and he had an unkempt beard. I warned him to fuck off, and I raised the stick. The man smiled and said words I will never forget.
All I want to do is play.
At this comment, I closed the distance, delivering a kick to his groin. He moaned and began to stumble. I brought down the stick as hard as I could, breaking it over his head. The man fell on the path. With an utter fear in my heart, I ran as fast as I could. My coach was waiting for me at the end of the forest path. She could see that I looked fearful and asked me what was wrong. I smiled and told her nothing. I decided not to tell my coach anything because I didn't think she'd believe me. After a few days, I decided to tell my parents, who told me to tell my coach immediately. I told her the next practice, and we did not run in those woods again. To this day, over a year later, I still have decided not to enter those woods. And to the man, for your sake, let's not meet ever again.
So I used to live in the craziest part of San Francisco, Baker Beach. Baker Beach is located in front of a formerly abandoned hospital turned condominium, and the only way back late night is walking over a mile through the woods in the northern part of the city. Pics will be included in the comments. In addition, this is where the Zodiac killer killed people, and these are the ones that remained unsolved. To top it all, the part of the woods is used as a graveyard that was dug up years ago, so yeah, this all makes it creepy as hell. Needless to say, I always carry a large knife on me. So, I'm walking home from smoking at my friend's place from the bus stop to my house. I noticed that a guy in a black hoodie got off at the exact same stop as me. I started walking off and he notices me, and then he begins tailing me for a few 100 feet. It's almost a block length. I keep on walking regardless and he keeps on following me. Now I can't get a good look at this guy. His face is hidden under the black hoodie, so I can't make out even if it's male or female. But I can see he has something that he's holding in his waistband. I don't know if it was a knife, though it could have been. Due to the distance, I'm pretty sure it was. I finally hit the gate, and as I looked back, I see him turning into a house entrance. I breathed a sigh of relief and mocked myself for being so paranoid. I took one look back over my shoulder just to make sure he wasn't there. This time, he was just staring around the doorway at me. He then began following me again. He began to follow me as I reached the entrance of the woods and picked up his pace. After being in the woods by about a few 100 feet, I decided that I was going to confront him. Full of adrenaline, I turned under a street light and made a huge smile come across my face. It was the creepiest I could muster, and I lifted my big knife up and charged at him screaming. I was screaming incoherently, but by God was it loud. It was more than enough to get people to hear what was happening, but way more than enough to scare him. He started panicking and started to reach for his knife, so I screamed even louder and he then took off running. I was yelling about how I was about to eat him. So yeah, I out-crazied the crazy. I still don't walk in those woods alone at night. I'm just thankful that I never met him lurking deep in there, and I actually saw him. Thank you my swamp friend for featuring on this video. We're going to be doing a lot more videos soon, so make sure you guys stay tuned to check them out. Make sure you go and subscribe to SwampDweller's channel. He's the other narrator you can hear featured on this video, and he always does a really nice job on his narrations. It's a pleasure to work with you as always, and I'm looking forward to our next videos coming out soon. Make sure you've clicked the subscribe button as well as click the notification tab on my channel to get updated when I'm uploading videos. I'm back from my holiday and it's actually the best thing I've ever done in my life. I actually went to New York and it's just really cool. I can't get over how nice American people are and somebody. But yeah, thank you all for being patient and waiting for me to come back. I've now got more energy than ever to start doing these videos and I'm just really happy to be back, and I've got lots of stuff I'm going to get doing soon. I'll explain some more in an update video I'll probably do later this week. I hope you're all well. God bless and take care.